Hi everyone, and welcome back to the higher level chess course. Last time I was showing you a game which I thought was particularly interesting, involving pawn storms and the way to attack in such a situation. That was a Grandmaster game, but this week I'm going to show you something less than a Grandmaster game, which is one of my games. So I'm not quite on that level, I'm afraid, but that doesn't matter because I feel that there's still a lot that can be learned from your own games. Now, that's why it's so important to write down your moves when you're playing a longer game, because you can analyze it afterwards and find things that you might not expect, some interesting possibilities that you might have missed, or maybe just something that you're very proud of. And to start off today, I wanted to show you a kind of a, I suppose it's a puzzle, but it's a puzzle from one of my games. This game was played fairly recently. It was just before the pandemic, before everything shut down and we weren't able to play over-the-board chess. Now, my opponent was a multiple champion of Surrey, so a strong county champion. I'm playing as black in this position, and I'm going to show you the move that I played. Which was this one, knight to e4. Okay. First things first, probably best to set this up on your board because I think it's quite a complicated position in some respects. First of all, we need to compare material. So I think we can do that together. So again, queen versus queen, 2 rooks against 2 rooks, knight against knight, bishop against bishop. And well, just count the pawns. Well, white has got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Black has got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So material is equal. But now I think we need to consider the relative value of the pieces. Now, what I mean by that is that pieces which are heavily restricted or which have fewer places to move to are worth less than their counterparts, than the opposite piece. So what I mean is, let's compare perhaps this rook, for example, to perhaps this one, or maybe this one. Notice that this rook has got any number of squares it can move to, up or down, even left or right. Compare that to rook number 1, which has just one space it can go to safely. And rook number 2, which has relatively few squares as well. So just the 2, I think, isn't it? Oh, sorry, 3 squares, but in a very limited radius. So this rook is much more powerful than either of the enemy rooks. And again, compare the 2 queens. Well, this queen has a lot of scope, mostly along this diagonal, but also as a defensive piece, protecting several of white's pieces there. Compare that to black's queen. Well, black's queen is, again, very limited in what it can do. It can only move along the back rank or perhaps slightly further out like this. But in any case, white, I'm sure you can see, has a bit of an advantage here, and not in terms of material, but in terms of the actual piece placement. Okay? So I thought, I want to try and change this situation. I need to try to attack. And I thought, well, this looks like a fairly decent move. I'm going to attack the white rook. I'm going to put a knight in the center where it's controlling several squares in enemy territory. What I didn't realize, I think what I underestimated, I suspected the move that occurs next may have happened when I was analyzing this, but I didn't quite calculate to the end of the variation. So what we're looking for here is a very cool checkmating pattern. Okay, so this is several moves. It will take several moves. As I say, pause the video. Make sure you're setting this up on your board at home. If you can do it in your head, then that is fantastic. But if you can't, doesn't matter. Just try to play through some variations on your board. So pause the video now and see what you can manage. Okay, I'm going to go through this sort of step by step so that, again, after each move, you can pause the video and see if it gives you any ideas. Now, the move that was played in the game was something called an exchange sacrifice. That's when we sacrifice a rook for a bishop or knight in order to gain some kind of advantage. Now, basically, this move here is in order to get the knight off the rook's back. So that rook is no longer under threat. I think this is a perfectly good move because the knight here is a bit of a thorn. Well, it was a bit of a thorn in white's side, just kind of irritating the rook. After rook takes knight, well, that problem has disappeared. So I thought, okay, well, I can't just let white take one of my pieces for free. I've got to recapture. And again, a very strong move was played here. You may need to pause the video again, see if you can spot what that move was. Well, it was rook takes pawn. Now that is an outstanding move. I'm going to say that. Notice that, okay, if black avoids this kind of move, avoids taking the rook, is what I mean, then we've got a move such as this, and checkmate follows. So we can't not take the rook. This is a forced sequence. And again, can you spot the next move in the sequence? Pause the video. This one I think perhaps a little easier to see, perhaps. Or queen to g5, check. And notice again the limited options that black has. There is only one way to get out of check. That is king to h8. Now, this is the move that I missed when I was analysing the position during the game. I missed the fact that there was another strong move that followed this one. See if you can spot it. Well, it's possible we could, check the enemy king, such as this, but then the king would return to its original position, and we wouldn't really get anywhere in that way. I still think it's possible that white is going to be in danger. Maybe it's possible that knight g4 and then knight h6 would be a route forward. I think that's perfectly good too. But this is a more spectacular move. If you found this move, knight takes pawn, check, give yourself a pat on the back if you can reach. Not sure if I can reach. But it's check. Again, I have to take this knight. There's no way out of this. I can't just ignore it. I can't move the king either because of the queen. So rook takes knight. That was the move I missed. And now can you see the checkmate in 2? Again, pause the video if you need some extra time. Well, I should say I resigned at that point, seeing the checkmate. But the idea was bishop to e5, check. And then there's only one option. And then that is followed by queen takes rook, checkmate. An outstanding sequence. I'm going to repeat that for you just quickly. So after knight e4, an exchange sacrifice. We're sacrificing one piece, 2 pieces, check, 3 pieces, and then notice that the remaining 2 pieces that white has lead to mate. That is a really fantastic game, I thought, and like finish of the game. So even though I lost, I was impressed by my opponent's play. So always good to have that mentality. I think if you get too down about losing, then that can affect you. I think it's important to be grateful that you've had a really interesting game. Let's now lighten the mood and skip to this situation. Now, this was actually the game that was played previous to that one. It was in a part of a congress. Again, played in just before the pandemic. I would say that I didn't deserve to win this game. I was playing as white. I won't embarrass the player that was playing as black by naming this person. All I'll say is that they weren't pleased about losing. So it was an interesting game. up until this point, I was in serious trouble because notice, first of all, the material. You can count if you like, so queen against queen, rooks against rooks, bishop against knight, but notice the position of the pawns and also the quantity of the pawns. Now, we can see that black has got 6 pawns versus 5 white pawns, but notice that that pawn here is in serious danger. And also, I would say these 2 pawns here are dominating the 3 on the king side. The move that was just played here was this one, knight into e4. See if you can see what black is threatening in this position. What is the main problem that white has? If you need to set the board up as well, just do that. Well, I think the idea really, I wonder if you can follow this using arrows. The idea is knight here. It's going to be a smothered mate. I'm going to show you the variation. Let's say I don't know. Let's just say I just did a random move here. Let's say I did queen up, queen takes pawn. Okay. Well, we have the move knight here. Check. King has to move. Then notice the double check with the queen and the knight. If the king goes here, then we have mate on f2. Doesn't work. King goes into the corner. Then we have the spectacular move, rook. Oh, sorry, queen to g1. Amazing move, protected by the knight. The rook has to take, and then we do mate. So that is a really cool smothered mate, which I luckily avoided in this game. I won't go through the whole thing. I want to just show you a portion of it, then we'll continue it next time. The way of simply, you know, there's not really many ways of getting out of this other than by taking the knight, because the knight is such a dangerous piece. The bishop, in comparison, is weak in that situation. So rook takes. Again, black would be quite happy to swap rooks here, I think. It would benefit black because he's a pawn ahead. So especially with an endgame, you want to try to make it as easy as possible if you're winning to get to a winning situation. So, for example, you could try and promote a pawn, but more likely you want to reduce the number of attacking pieces on the board so that white doesn't have any counter attacks. I realized this. I mean, there's not much that can be done here, I don't think, to repel checkmate eventually. But I decided to adopt an aggressive approach. Try to avoid looking on the right-hand side, by the way, where the moves are. But the move, see if you can, again, spot the move that was played here. I'm not saying it's necessarily the best move, but in terms of practical chess, we want to try to just do the best we can to turn the game around, make it complicated for the opponent. See if you can spot it. Well, it's CCTV, and this is a threat. So the T stands for threat. So checks, captures, threats, and just violence on the chessboard. So after this move, we now need to think how we're going to change the course of this game. Well, currently we have a threat to deal with. So we have rook takes rook, because notice that there's protection from this rook. So we have to move this. Probably the best move for me is just to move it where I can attack an enemy piece, so attack the queen. That means really that the queen has to move. Queen does indeed move. I think well, there's a number of places it could go, but queen c3 is as good a move as any. Because see if you can spot what black's threat is in this scenario. Well, basically there's any number of moves that I think can be played here, but I think the most dangerous of all is probably queen f3 check, followed by a move such as rook e2. Okay. Now, I realize that this is going to take, I've got basically a move or 2 moves to spend. How am I going to solve this? Well, I can't kick the queen away. There's no way I can force the queen to move. if I came back here with the queen, that wouldn't help the situation. This check is going to happen anyway. Even if I move the king out, it's still going to happen because of the protection. So how about we try to turn the tables? We target the enemy king. What would you do in order to try to attack the enemy king? This is actually a little tricky because notice that these rooks are doing a pretty good job of covering the squares around the king. Notice I can't just check the king here. That doesn't work. The only space that I can use to attack the enemy king is this one. If I can get to that square, it gives me a bit of play because it means that the king is vulnerable to checks and maybe therefore repetition. So stuff like threefold repetition, I can maybe get a draw that way. So that's probably my best chance of saving the game. And I thought, well, let's go for it. Queen h6 to get the queen to this square. Now, again, a move here, a very dangerous move, I think. Rook to e2 was played. And again, the idea is to go rook, queen f3, and then queen here, checkmate. Okay, and that's an immediate threat. So and there's not really any easy way to deal with this. I mean, I have to probably I would maybe go rook f1, but it's really only a matter of time because then I think black can reroute the queen to here instead, and then that would just lead to checkmate in a different way. So the move that you have to play here, I think, is a check. Queen g5 check. So luckily for black, there's a lot of protection along this diagonal. So I think it's quite possible that king to h8 is an okay move. Notice again that this threat exists. I can't check the enemy king without being taken by this queen. So I have to come across rook f1 to guard this square. And after queen to d4, there's only really one way of preventing this move. Okay? So how would you do it? How would you continue the game? I'm going to probably end this session here. I'm going to continue this lesson, I think, next time, because I think it's a particularly interesting game. So it's white to play. Think of what your next move would be. Okay, I'm going to unshare that screen, and I'm going to say thanks very much. This lesson, I think, is all about, first of all, combinations, checkmating combinations, but also making sure that you maximize your resources. So even if you're losing the game, you've got to try to change the course of the game. So particularly using your queen if you can. If you've got your queen sit on the board, then that is potentially a very dangerous weapon, especially against a vulnerable king. So look out for ways to counterattack. Okay? I'll continue that game next week. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and catch you next time.